welcome to another edition of the Metal Voice.
Yes.
This is our classic collection series of episodes. We're going back 30 years and dedicating anniversaries to famous albums of the time. And today we're starting with Defenders of the Faith, Judas Priest, with the big cartoon-looking monster here, because we're really going after that 12 to 13-year-old male demographic on this one.
Transformers, Alan.
A little bit more, a little bit more comical than the Hellion off of Screaming for Vengeance.
That's right, Alan.
A little bit more bubblegummy.
Yes.
But the album is far from being the same.
Yes.
This is a return to form for Judas Priest. They were criticized on Point of Entry, even British Steel to a certain extent, how, songs like Living After Midnight and, Hot Rocking, of course, off of Point of Entry. They came back with Screaming for Vengeance, which really launched their, really solidified their place as the foremost metal group in the early 80s. But even at that, some of the songs on there, Jim, were criticized. Bloodstone or Pain and Pleasure.
Yeah.
And then they come back with Defenders of the Faith.
Some heads are gonna roll.
That's what they were doing. They were defending the faith at this point with Heavy Duty and Night Comes Down. But it's really songs like Jawbreaker and The Sentinel with the guitars.
Oh.
If they only had Scott Travis on drums on this album, it would have been unbelievable.
It would have been complete.
But this takes us back to that period, and it's the 30th anniversary. It was released in 1984, and we're here to talk about it today.
Alan, right off the bat, the first time I heard Free Will Burnin', I was like, whoa, wait a second. Judas Priest. So they're coming off their Screaming for Vengeance. Hugely, that's probably one of the biggest commercially successful album ever, right? Free Will Burnin' comes on the radio, and the thing that stands out the most is the bridge.
I was just going to say the same thing.
I mean, just the phrasing, the timing, there is no one like Rob Halford. Probably one of his best vocal performances next to Painkiller, right? This is ultimately, the production is fantastic. Yeah. The guitar, the twin guitar solos on every track. This is classic heavy
KK
metal.
and Glenn outdo themselves on this album.
Then Love Bites. The sort of like doomy sort of intro with the bass, right? Burr, 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 burr. And then you have Halford coming in, and he's always sort of like
Vampire of the Night.
Yes. It's just, I don't know. I don't see too many weak tracks on this album. It's solid.
They even got the radio-friendly ones. After coming off of, you've got another thing coming. I'm sure CBS was like, we need another hit. So they brought in Bob Halligan Jr.
Yes.
You might know him from Rock You from Helix.
Yeah.
And he had the Some Heads Are Gonna Roll.
And it was their
Rock
hit.
Hard, Ride Free. I mean, these were all played on the radio back in the day.
Yeah.
So they had quite a few more tracks. But again, like you said, Free Will Burning, Jawbreaker, The Sentinel.
Yes.
That break in The Sentinel where it builds back up. I mean, they were, as far as I'm concerned, they were the first, especially when we saw what followed.
Yes.
Turbo.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this was, for me, the epitome. It was, and I was able to see, we've discussed in previous episodes, that tour, Jimmy.
And, here's a note for everybody who was like a lot younger than us. We lived through the era, so we remember when it was actually released. So this is what happened. Eat Me Alive, which is maybe the third or fourth track off the album, that was noted by the PRMC a year later as one of the 15...
dirtiest.
The dirtiest songs.
Morale corrupting tracks.
You read the lyrics. I mean, it's tame. There's nothing,
by today's standards.
By today's standards, it's nothing. And a little bit of history here. So when Judas Priest was on tour, there was some trend that was happening in the stadiums. Back then, like the Forum, the Montreal Forum, the seats were very flimsy. Back then, all arenas, they weren't as, spanky new like they are today, right? So they had a lot of flimsy seats. So the trend was back then to rip the cushions out of the seats. So every time you go see a Black Sabbath show or you go see Judas Priest show, what the fans would do at the end of the show was rip the seats. So you had 15,000 people, not all of them, ripping out the seats. So now insurance premiums were like skyrocketing for the bands. They weren't getting booked
I never ripped out a seat in my life.
Maybe you didn't because you were a good personality, because you're a good guy.
Oh, it's too
but the
much
trend was ripping seat cushions out of the chairs, right? And it was horrible. And then all the bands, you say, guys, stop. They're never going to let us, they're never going to be able to book us across North America. And bands like Judas Priest were having problems getting booked. Insurance premiums were skyrocketing, ticket prices were going up. And another thing happened, Alan. A little bit of history. 1984, Ozzy Osbourne, a guy takes and he blows his head off. Commits suicide by listening to Ozzy's lyrics. And how does this tie into Judas
Suicide
Priest?
Solution.
Suicide Solution. So the court brings Ozzy, is a management team to court, and says, we blame you for, inciting violence and suicide. Of course, the judge threw the case right out.
Right.
But what happened was, a year later,
Yeah.
Judas Priest were brought to court because another teenager, or two of them, just killed themselves as well, inciting the Judas Priest. Now
Beyond
they had
the realms of death.
some sort of hidden lyrics or hidden messages within the songs that was thrown out. But what happened was 1984 was the last golden era of metal. Why?
Why, Jim?
Because nobody wanted to touch metal after the suicides, after the seat cushion ripping, and after the PRMC with their list of the 15 most
I don't know.
deadliest songs.
I must have been sleeping those years. I don't
This was
remember any of this.
1984
And what
was
has
the
to do with
last
Defenders
era.
of the Faith?
No, I just want to put it. Now, 1984 was the last golden year that Priest was heard on the radio, because the year after there was so many issues in metal.
Speaking of ticket price, here's my ticket for the Defenders of the Faith tour. And as you mentioned, I thought I'd look. $12.50.
Yes.
They were good seats. They were in the orchestra section, very close to the stage. Great White had opened.
Yeah.
And that was March 28th, 1984.
1984.
I would imagine.
That's right. 30 years.
$12.50.
Yeah.
Great White had the first tour, and they're backing their eponymous album,
Yep.
titled album.
Yep.
They were a great opening band.
Yep.
What stands out for that tour, that concert, was Rob Halford drowned out the band on the Scream for Victim of Changes.
Oh.
I think the ringing is still partially deaf because of that Scream today. But just like you said, a fantastic vocalist. For me, this was the height of Judas Priest for many years. Took them a while to bounce back, to get back to this level.
Yeah.
People that were into them in the late 70s will definitely argue that. They probably think they peaked with Stay in Class or Sin After Sin. But, it took them a while to really get back with something like Painkiller and get the respect of the fans. But by then, like as you said, Jim, people like Nirvana were present and the whole scene had changed.
This was an album-oriented album, right? In a sense that there was no big hit. And a lot of people call Defenders of the Faith the dark horse of their collection, sort of like that hidden gem that is, it's just sort of a masterpiece that nobody knows about, or not too many people know about.
But even a deep track like When Night Comes Down, because of Rob Halford's voice, it's amazing.
It is.
How he can transform the whole song, even if it's one of the most quieter tracks on the album. It's still a solid cut. And then the Heavy Duty is their, kind of like their Metal Gods that leads into the outro of Defenders of the Faith. And that's what they really believed they were doing at that time.
That's right.
They were struggling to hold on to the position that they fought so hard throughout the 70s. They were always overshadowed by the older groups that preceded them, like Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin. And then they were being chased and surpassed in some cases by the younger New Waben bands like Iron Maiden and Saxon. So their window of opportunity to stay on top was very short. I would say 80 to 82, and this album was their in a sense their statement to the world to say, look, we're still here, we're not going anywhere, and you guys try to beat this. Which, as we spoke on our previous 30th anniversary collection, guys like Metallica were in the situation, and the whole scene was changing to make bands like Judas Priest look a little bit like dinosaurs. So again, this is a very solid album. You go back, revisit it, you'll be amazed at the vocals, you'll be amazed at the guitar work, and I would give this album definitely, Jim, a 9 out of 10.
I would even go a little higher, maybe a 9.5 out of 10. That's how much I love this album. So, 30 years, the celebration, 30-year anniversary, Judas Priest, Defenders of the Faith.
Check it out.